that. Right, we move on to the very closely linked issue of the future urban land strategy. So welcome to the team. All right. Okay,
Madam
well,
Chair,
welcome.
I'll just get Simon to give us a bit of context on this item, if that's okay.
Thanks,
Thank
Simon.
you, Madam Chair. Good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. The draft urban land supply strategy builds on the work that's been undertaken to identify the rural-urban boundary and the future urban zones as part of the proposed Auckland Unitary Plan. The draft strategy essentially provides another level of detail. Its purpose is to identify a sequence for when the future urban areas are anticipated to be ready for development. It seeks to promote the planning and coordination of planning and bulk infrastructure provision to provide greater guidance and clarity to all key partners and stakeholders, including landholders, infrastructure providers, iwi, the development sector, the independent hearing panel and submitters to the unitary plan. The strategy is part of a wider approach for addressing Auckland's growth. As set out in the Auckland plan, the majority of the growth is anticipated within the existing urban area, with up to 40% of the future growth located outside the 2010 metropolitan urban limit. This strategy primarily, or in fact the strategy focuses on that part of the growth outside of the 2010 MUL. During hearings, the proposed Auckland Unitary Plan independent hearing panel sought some clarity about what this strategy will do and what form it would take, and this draft strategy signals Council's approach. It has been developed collaboratively with extensive input and validation from Watercare, Auckland Transport, the New Zealand Transport Agency, Veolia, ACPL and Council's Stormwater Unit. The infrastructure and providing infrastructure has been the key consideration in developing the strategy. Not the only consideration, but certainly the key one. The scale of the area of land involved, the scale of the infrastructure required to urbanise these areas, and the lead-in times providing this infrastructure have had a significant influence on the proposed sequencing. Aligning infrastructure investment and planning ensures integrated investment across all infrastructure classes, and sequencing infrastructure provision spreads investment and cost across time and seeks to minimise expenditure spikes. This strategy provides flexibility and it will be amended over time. A monitoring program is an integral part of the strategy and will be important to understand the changes that are required to timing and sequencing, and that would be in response to patterns and composition of population change, how much growth we are getting, the balance of growth inside and outside the metropolitan urban limit that is being achieved, and also the delivery of the key infrastructure projects, just making sure that those infrastructure projects that are critical to enable these areas to be urbanised do in fact go ahead in the time frame that they are expected or anticipated at the time that the strategy is being drafted. None of these factors obviously are static and they will change over time, and consequently changes may well be required to the time and sequencing set out in the strategy. The recommendation before you today seeks approval for consultation on this draft strategy. It is proposed to take the strategy out to consultation from the 17th of July to the 17th of August, and it will be undertaken as a special consultative procedure under the Local Government Act. And as a result of that, we're asking for a hearing panel to be formed from members of the ADC to enable people to provide feedback, and also for that hearings panel to consider that feedback. A series of Have Your Say events will be held in early August. We are currently working to confirm the dates. At the end of the consultation period, a report from the hearing panel will be prepared summarising the feedback received, and based on the feedback, making recommendations on any amendments to the strategy as required. It is then proposed to report back to ADC in October with the final strategy for adoption.
Thank you.
Thank you,
That's
Madam
a good outline of where we're going, and in consultation with the Deputy Chair, I'm going to put forward some names. I'm going to recommend that the Deputy Chair, Councillor Darby, be one of the 3 panel members, and looking at the location of these key areas. Councillor Webster for the Northwest and Councillor Cashmore for the area that him and Councillor Penrose cover so adequately. And we've got the Independent Māori Statutory Board will make their decision on their member on this. Okay, so let's take some questions in the first instance. Councillor Webster.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for putting my name forward, I think. I suppose, I mean, I've been reasonably critical of the way that some of the northern area gets treated, particularly, and it concerns me, and just reading in here, statements like the extension of the Pūhoi to Wellsford Road of national significance will be completed to Warkworth by 2022, making this area attractive for development. It's happening now. My concern is we keep talking about it as if it's going to happen in the future, and this is why it will be good to get this strategy out there. I don't know whether I'll go to have your says, because I'll probably get my head cut off, but you know, we do need to recognise that growth is happening now. In 2015, we have always been a higher growth area than the statistics that REMU come out with are saying, and that really concerns me.
I think that point's well taken, and I think if we need to, I will get Mr. Jacques to make some comments on that. But we constantly get hooked up on the low, medium, high growth scenarios, and contrary to Ms. Bright's opinion, we're constantly operating at the high end of the growth scenario. Now, other questions, Councillor?
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. Just in relation to this, the Auckland plan advocates this 70-40 split, 70 within the metropolitan urban limit and 40 outside. But we hear various feedback from what's happening at the hearings panel at the moment. And I think Mr. Blakely, when he was here as the Chief Planning Officer, he indicated it was about a 50-50 split now. Is that how you're reading it at the present time?
Through the Chair, I would suggest that number is probably correct at this time. However, the purpose of the 70-40 split is that is achieved at the end of the 30-year period of the Auckland plan. It doesn't have to be achieved in year on year.
So it's 50-50 now, you think?
I'm loath to comment on that, Councillor. I haven't seen the most recent figures that would indicate that.
Okay.
We'll just get some clarification from you, Councillor.
Yeah, through the Madam Chair, we can come back on the actual figures if you like.
Okay. I think Dr. Blakely, when he was here, used to saying that it had changed quite markedly from the Auckland plan. So I'd like to know where you actually see we're landed at the present time on this split.
Yeah.
Other people may be interested in as well. Thank you.
Okay. I think the critical thing is that this is a 30-year time frame, and as our experts have said, if we're aiming for the 70-40.
Yeah, okay. Madam Chair, can I just ask, that you've appointed those three people. I think Councillor Quacks has indicated that he was interested in being involved in this as well. I just wonder, is it paramount that it's only three, or could Councillor Quacks be included as well?
Through the Chair, Madam, the legislation says a minimum of three.
So we've got four.
I'd be happy to volunteer.
Yeah, five. You're happy to volunteer, Councillor? Okay. Righty-ho. We're never short of volunteers when it comes to these things, so we can... Any objections, councillors, to having Councillor Quacks there? No, it appears not. Any other questions on this? Mr. Victor?
Madam Chair, I'm just going to try and clarify a little bit. So I wasn't here when Dr. Blakely might have made that statement. So I don't know where he got that. What he might have said was, over the first 10 years of the Auckland plan, the split, so the expected split in growth is around 50-50. So the Auckland plan foresaw that maybe in the first decade it would be more 50-50 split. Towards the third decade, you would probably get more of the brownfield growth rather than the greenfield. So that might be what he was referring to.
And I think the critical thing is, let's not beat about the bush. We are still getting the unitary plan settled. It's the unitary plan that unlocks the potential for brownfield development. And some of our strongest critics for spreading into greenfield are also our sort of stumbling blocks to brownfield redevelopment. So, you know, this is one of those where if you're serious about a contained city, you have to get serious about brownfield redevelopment. And for those of us trying very hard to land the provisions of the unitary plan that will unlock the potential of brownfield redevelopment, we need a little dose of realism here. Councillor Casey.
It was just to ask the consultation so far with local boards. We did have a workshop and some local boards attended. How do they input into this plan that we're approving today? Or is that
Yeah, there is an intentional, through the Chair Council, there is an intention to meet directly with the local boards during the consultation period. They were invited, obviously, to the workshop, but my understanding was there were other commitments at the time. So the level of input from the local boards at this stage has not been significant, but that's something that we will be working through during the consultation period.
right, so they don't have any input into what's going out for public consultation at this stage?
Other than the workshop, no.
The reality is, though, particularly Rodney's the one that I've been dealing with most with Councillor Webster, this is the day-to-day life of these boards. They know that they are in these growth areas. And, you know, Upper Harbour, Henderson, Massey, they're kind of involved in the day-to-day discussions. So this is kind of formalising a little bit those discussions that are happening already, but quite rightly, the consultation will make sure that they're well included and partnered in this. But, you know, you'd have to be living under a rock for this to come as a surprise to you, to know that you're in a high growth area that's going to need servicing by infrastructure.
Right.
Any other questions? Okay, well, I'm happy to move the recommendation. Yep. Oh, Councillor Brewer.
Thank you. I was just wanting to, because I've been trying to find some comment here, and it might have been covered off from Auckland Transport and Water Care at a top level. I have seen previous comments, I think, when we workshopped this, but just what comfort you got or reservations that may have been made around the sequencing of this future urban zone land, particularly when you look at the costs aligned with it, bulk infrastructure costs that surprise no one, but and also the doability of the fuzz land as it's rolled out as per the strategy. Where were Auckland Transport Water Care's concerns at a top level, and where were some of their reservations met?
Through the
If
Chair,
any.
a series of workshops to have a look at each future urban zone area individually and then to look at them regionally were undertaken, and that was attended by Auckland Transport, NZTA, Veolia, Water Care, our Stormwater Unit, ACPL, and it was through those workshops that decisions were made around the timing of when these areas were likely or anticipated to be development ready. And a lot of that was based on, particularly with enabling water and wastewater infrastructure, the length of time that it takes for those projects to go through certainly from design through consent and then through the construction.
Do they still harbour any concerns around the sequencing, doability or cost?
Through the chair, no, to the best of my knowledge, we have an agreement with the infrastructure providers that this is an approach that they support, wish to take, and the sequencing is an order they agree with.
Thank you.
Councillor Quacks.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair, and look, and Simon, thanks for your response to the questions that I've been bombarding with you with over the last couple of weeks. First of all, Madam Chair, I've got to say that I'm pleased that this is intended as a living document and capable of change over time. I think that's really important because what I'd like to address, Madam Chair, is whether whether 11,000 hectares or 110 square kilometres, which is a 20% increase on the urban area at the moment, is actually enough to accommodate the 70% population growth that will occur over the period of this plan. So it's really important that we get that right. Otherwise, we will have a continuation of the lack of affordable land and the economic and social issues that go along with the restricted supply of land. And the Auckland plan, as we know, calls for between, I think it's about 240 and 280,000 new dwellings to be accommodated within the MUL. And there's been a lot of good work done, as I understand it. Some of the work that I've seen that's been done by REMU in their capacity for growth study, 2012 and 2013, which looked at potential or theoretical capacity, not real capacity or not market-ready capacity within Auckland, and I understand that's being looked at the moment, what the market feasibility is of the land that's out there. And so it's really important to understand just what is available, and just as important, when that change will occur. Because as I understand it, there's no real understanding yet of how quickly change occurs as upzoning allows for different uses of land. And the problem, I guess, around the capacity for growth study was that it included land that would never be developed because of sloping sites or sites that were prone to flooding and so forth. It also included retirement homes, schools, churches, residentially zoned land, and also included parks. And it also assumed that every site would be developed to 100% of its potential. And the problem with that, and I understand we're coming to grips with that, I hope we're coming to grips with that, is that it takes no account of how others will react to that zoning change. In other words, how will developers react, how will owners react, how will investors react to that potential that's provided with upzoning. So, look, I look forward to being part of the panel. I look forward to taking part in a discussion on future land supply. I suspect, as Councillor Wood has indicated, that we will end up much closer at the end of this period to a 50-50 between greenfields and brownfields development. I think that's recognised by a lot of people that is in reality, that will occur. And so, I think that intensification will happen, and it will happen in those areas where it is embraced by the community, where it is economically viable, but I'm sceptical that it will happen to the extent that we will be able to accommodate nearly 300,000 houses within the 2010 MUL, and that means that more land will have to be provided beyond the 11,000 hectares or 110 square kilometres that is proposed. And so I welcome the statement that it is a living document that will change over time, Madam Chair. And I certainly look forward to being part of the hearings group, the hearings panel, and having some input into this, what I consider to be probably the most important decisions that we will be making, because if we don't get it right, we will have an economic and social crisis on our hand, where we end up with a city where basically it's a group of the wealthy who own land, who own property, and those people who do not own land and who will always be shut out of that wealth creation that land owning provides people.